There are moments in life when a person breaks so deeply that something inside them changes forever. Some people collapse, some lose themselves, some turn bitter, and then there are a few rare souls who transform in ways no one expected. This is the story of Joseph Larson, a young man who stood behind a microphone not just to sing but to survive, a young preacher whose life has been admired, criticized, discussed, and sometimes misunderstood. A young man whose path to God wasn't built on comfort. It was carved out of heartbreak, pain, and personal loss that almost nobody knows in detail. People often ask, why did Joseph become so serious about God so young? How did he grow spiritually so fast? What made him so emotional, so intense in worship? Many think it was talent, others believe it was family legacy. But those who truly understand him know something else. It was heartbreak, the kind that shatters a person's soul and forces them to rebuild from scratch. This is not a story about betrayal, not a story of blame, not a story of drama. This is a story of transformation, how pain turned a young man into a preacher, how heartbreak became the doorway to destiny, and how losing someone became the moment he truly found God. The pressure of being a Larson. Growing up in the Larson family wasn't simple. The world saw smiles, music, ministry, but behind the scenes, Joseph felt an enormous weight. The pressure to be perfect. The pressure to live up to the family name. The pressure to never fail. The pressure to always be spiritual. The pressure to handle criticism. And deep inside, Joseph struggled with a silent question. What if I'm not enough? He was young, sensitive, emotional, and like every young man, he wanted acceptance, especially from the people he loved most. Joseph wasn't a celebrity when he first fell in love. He was just a young man who wanted someone to understand him. Not Joseph the singer, not Joseph the preacher's son, but Joseph the person. For a while he felt understood, for a while he felt seen, for a while he believed he found his forever. But life has its own way of testing hearts. There came a moment, quiet, painful, unexpected, when he realized that the person he cared for was walking in a different direction. Not because she was bad, not because Joseph wasn't enough, but because sometimes God removes people before they become anchors. Joseph had never felt pain like that before. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't sing. He couldn't focus. He felt like something had been ripped out of him. He would wake up at night wondering, why wasn't I enough? What did I do wrong? Why did God let this happen? His confidence broke. His voice felt weaker. Even his sermons felt empty. People saw him smiling on stage, but they didn't see the tears he wiped before stepping out. Pain doesn't break everyone the same way. For Joseph, it broke him toward God instead of away from him. Joseph started spending hours alone. Not on social media, not with friends, not even with family all the time. He sat alone with a Bible, a guitar, and a broken heart. And in that silence, something supernatural began to happen. He started praying, not with words but with tears. He started singing, not with performance but with pain. He started seeking God, not for ministry but for healing. And slowly, God started transforming him. His preaching became deeper. His worship became more powerful. His understanding of grace became real. His leadership became mature. His emotional sensitivity became spiritual strength. This was a turning point. The heartbreak didn't destroy him. It refined him. People started noticing the change. His worship had fire. His sermons had depth. His songwriting had maturity. His eyes had a new kind of intensity. The kind that only comes from surviving something that almost broke you. Everyone saw the transformation. Nobody saw the process. Pain made him grow. Heartbreak made him pray. Loss made him listen to God. This is why Joseph Larson stands where he stands today. Not because of perfection, but because of pain. Life didn't end that day. In fact, it started. Joseph discovered purpose. He discovered calling. He discovered God in a deeper way. And later, he discovered real love with his wife, Grace. A relationship built on healing, growth, and God's timing. The past didn't destroy him. It prepared him. The heartbreak didn't ruin his future. It shaped it. And because of that, the Joseph Larson we see today, confident, passionate, anointed, exists because God used the broken pieces of his past to build the masterpiece of his future. When Joseph first began to open his heart to someone, he wasn't the confident worship leader people see today. He was a young man searching for connection, longing for understanding, and hoping that someone could see beyond the ministry image that surrounded him. In public, he looked composed, disciplined, and focused. But privately, he carried insecurities that he didn't share with many. People often assume that growing up in a well-known Christian family protects you from normal life struggles. But that's far from the truth. Joseph felt emotions even more intensely because everything he did was under a spotlight. Every friendship, every relationship, every choice. So when he allowed someone to come close, it meant he trusted them with a part of himself he rarely showed. Their connection began softly, quietly, not dramatic, not public. Just two young people who found comfort in each other's words. For the first time in a long time, Joseph felt like someone understood his fears, not just his calling. He felt seen, heard, valued, not as Lauren Larson's son, not as a singer at SBN, but simply as Joseph. He started imagining a future, something simple, something pure, something built on faith, love, and trust. And that is where young hearts often get tested, when they begin to dream. At first, everything felt right. They talked about their hopes, their struggles, their goals. She encouraged him. He supported her. For a while, Joseph genuinely believed that God had written this connection into his story. He would pray about her, think about her during rehearsals, even smile to himself before stepping onto the stage because her presence made him feel stronger. But slowly, subtle changes began to appear, not dramatic, not loud, but enough for Joseph to feel something shifting. Conversations became shorter, messages felt different, the warmth was fading, something invisible was slipping away. Joseph didn't understand it at first. Was it something he did? Was he too busy with ministry? Was he wrong to dream of a future so soon? Was he simply not enough? He wrestled with these questions silently, never showing his confusion to the world. He would still stand behind the pulpit and sing with passion, but behind those notes was a young man trying to make sense of emotional distance he couldn't explain. Then came the moment that changed everything, the realization that she was moving on in a direction he wasn't part of. Not because she was wrong, not because she was a bad person, but because sometimes two hearts are not on the same path, even if they started at the same point. Joseph felt the weight of that moment like a blow to his chest. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. There was no fight, no argument, no final conversation that brought closure. Just a deep, silent understanding that something he valued was slipping away, and he couldn't hold it together anymore. The pain hit him harder than he expected. He had imagined a future. He had prayed about her. He had trusted that this connection was safe. Losing her felt like losing a part of himself. He didn't cry in front of anyone, but his heart broke in ways that shook his spiritual foundation. He felt confusion, sadness, and a sense of emptiness he couldn't put into words. The world saw Joseph the worship leader, but he felt like Joseph the boy who had lost someone he truly cared for. His confidence took a hit. His voice felt heavier. Even his smile didn't rise as easily as before. But the deepest wound wasn't rejection. It was the feeling that he wasn't enough. And that's what pushed him into a quiet spiritual war inside his own heart. He questioned his worth. He questioned his direction. He questioned God's timing. Some nights he would sit alone, guitar in hand but unable to sing. Other nights he would replay memories in his mind trying to understand where everything went wrong. He didn't blame her, he blamed himself. But pain, when handled with humility, has a way of guiding a soul toward purpose. Joseph didn't know it then, but the heartbreak he was experiencing would soon become the very fire that reshaped his life, his calling, and his relationship with God. What he lost emotionally, God was preparing to return spiritually, but stronger, deeper, and more meaningful than he ever imagined. This was the beginning of a transformation that no one around him could see yet. A transformation that would take a broken-hearted young man and turn him into the preacher the world now recognizes. When the heartbreak settled in, the silence around Joseph became louder than any music he had ever sung. He didn't talk about it publicly, not to friends, not to people who admired him, not even to those who thought they understood him. He simply carried the pain quietly, the way gentle hearts often do. There were days he would sit alone in his room, staring at the ceiling, wondering how something that once felt so right could end so unexpectedly. He wasn't angry at her, and he wasn't angry at God, but he was deeply confused. Confusion is a strange kind of pain. It doesn't scream, it doesn't break you in one blow. It slowly empties you from the inside, piece by piece. Joseph found himself withdrawing from people. He became quieter. He laughed less. The sparkle in his eyes dimmed. Even when he stood on stage, something inside him felt heavy. Worship became harder because every time he opened his mouth to sing, the ache in his heart whispered louder. But it was in these moments of emotional collapse that something extraordinary began to happen. Pain pushed Joseph into a place he had never gone before, a place of raw honesty before God. He started spending long hours alone, not because he wanted to, but because he didn't know what else to do with the emptiness he felt. Nights became longer. Sleep became difficult. Memories came back uninvited. Every small reminder hurt. Every song reminded him of something he had lost. Yet, in those lonely nights, when tears soaked into his pillow and questions circled in his mind, Joseph discovered something incredibly powerful. God was closer in heartbreak than he had ever been in joy. At first, Joseph didn't recognize it. He thought the heaviness he felt was just sadness. But gradually he began to realize that his spirit was being molded, shaped, stretched. Every tear dropped was making him softer, humbler, more dependent on God in a way he had never experienced. He didn't pray fancy prayers. He didn't preach to himself. He didn't force positivity. He just opened his heart and let God see the broken pieces. One night, while sitting alone with his guitar, he tried to play, but only ended up crying quietly. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't hide from his pain. He let it flow. He let it break him. He let it speak. That night marked the beginning of a spiritual awakening. Joseph started journaling things he never told anyone. His private prayers became deeper, desperate, sincere. He wasn't praying for success, for ministry, for recognition. He was praying for healing, for strength, for understanding, for peace. And slowly, the spiritual shift began. His worship changed. His sermons changed. His heart changed. Heartbreak had taken away a relationship, but it had given him something far greater. A direct line to God that wasn't built on tradition or family legacy, but on raw personal experience. He noticed something else too. Whenever he stood to sing in church, he felt an unusual fire inside him. A fire that didn't come from talent or training. It came from pain surrendered at the feet of God. His voice carried emotion it never carried before. His eyes held depth they never had before. His worship wasn't performance, it was survival. It was healing. It was a conversation between a wounded heart and a faithful God. People began to sense something different in him. They didn't know his story, but they felt the weight of his words, the sincerity of his singing, the authority in his preaching. They didn't know he had cried himself to sleep. They only saw the spiritual strength rising out of the ashes of his brokenness. Pain had become purpose. Loss had become direction. Heartbreak had become transformation. Joseph didn't become stronger overnight, but each day he healed a little more. Each prayer grew deeper. Each moment with God made him more whole.